comment you made earlier this week. You said that America has, quote, never been a racist country, unquote. Protections for the institution of slavery were written into the U.S. Constitution. The White House was built with slave labor. Your home state of South Carolina seceded from the Union, fought a war to defend the enslavement of black people. I understand you don't think America is a racist country now, but we're here at a college. Do you really think as a historical matter, America has never been a racist country?
I mean, think about what you're saying. First of all, I will tell you, when you look at, the Declaration of Independence, it was that, men are created equal with unalienable rights, right? That was what we all knew. But what I look at it as is I was a brown girl that grew up in a small rural town. We had plenty of racism that we had to deal with. But my parents never said we lived in a racist country. And I'm so thankful they didn't. Because for every brown and black child out there, if you tell them they live or were born in a racist country, you're immediately telling them they don't have a chance. And my parents would always say, you may have challenges. And yes, there will be people who are racist, but that doesn't define what you can do in this country. And so I think it's important that we tell all kids that, look, America is not perfect. We have our stains. We know that. But our goal should always be to make today better than yesterday. It's hugely important. And that's the problem I have, is we have too many people with this national self-loathing. It is killing our country. We have got to go back to loving America. We are blessed because that little brown girl in that small rural town in South Carolina, she grew up to become the first female minority governor in history. She then went on to be UN ambassador, and now she's running for president of the United States. I want every brown and black child to see that and say, no, I don't live in a country that was formed on racism. I live in a country where they wanted all people to be equal and to make sure that they had life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay, but just to push back a bit, because I was a history major in New Hampshire, you're talking about the ideals of America. But America was founded institutionally on many racist precepts, including slavery.
But when you look at said all men are created equal, I think the intent was to do the right thing. Now, did they have to go fix it along the way? Yes, but I don't think the intent was ever that we were going to be a racist country. The intent was everybody was going to be created equally. And as we went through time, they fixed the things that were not all men are created equal. They made sure women became equal too. All of these things happen over time. But I refuse to believe that the premise of when they formed our country was based on the fact that it was a racist country to start with. I refuse to believe that. I have to know in my heart and in everybody's heart that we live in the best country in the world, and we are a work in progress, and we've got a long way to go to fix all of our little kinks. But I truly believe our founding fathers had the best of intentions when they started, and we fixed it along the way, and we should always look at it that way.
I want to ask you something that Nikki Haley said earlier this morning. She was asked in an interview if the Republican Party was a racist party, and her response was, and I'm quoting her now, "We are not a racist country. We have never been a racist country." Do you agree that the U.S. has never been a racist country?
Well, the U.S. Is not a racist country, and we've overcome things in our history. I think the founding fathers, they established a set of principles that are universal. Now, they may not have been universally applied at the time, but I think they understood what they were doing. They understood that those principles would be the engine for progress for generations to come, and that's what's happened. I think the Republican Party stands for merit and achievement and colorblindness. That is what we should stand for.
There's no question about that. A lot of our history is uncomfortable, but you got to know the truth. I hear that the truth shall set you free. So we go to some experts here. One of them is Professor Beck, and he's done a lot of research here. And the New York Times explains, among Professor Beck's findings were that the number of lynchings did not rise or fall in proportion to the number of state-sanctioned executions, underscoring what Mr. Stevenson said was a crucial point, that these brutal deaths were not about administering popular justice, but terrorizing a community. So I want to give you that as background when I describe some of what happened. So you're not under the mistaken assumption, well, it was a terrible form of justice, but, these people had done something wrong. Well, in a great majority of the cases, they had done nothing wrong. It wasn't them in the first place. And Professor Beck explains further, many of these lynchings were not executing people for crimes, but executing people for violating the racial hierarchy. So now, having given you that background, let me share some of these stories. Now, of course, the descriptions themselves are gruesome. I'm in civil rights museums, including one in Alabama. I've seen some of the pictures, and they are stomach-turning. Okay. First story they have here in the New York Times is about a man named Kerwin. They explain, a town named Kerwin. In Kerwin, where 3 black men, 2 of them almost certainly innocent, were accused of killing a white woman, and under the gaze of hundreds of soda-drinking spectators, were castrated, stabbed, beaten, tied to a plow, and set afire in the spring of 1922. Now, part of the reason they do that is, of course, to show what their place is, and to punish that guy, and to take out their aggression and their anger against that poor guy. Of course, the other reason is to put terror in the hearts of every other black person in that area. They see that and they know, don't you ever dare cross a white person under any circumstance. So recently reading about Joe Frazier, the legendary boxing champion, he said, he grew up in the South, he said once a white guy, and this is in our lifetimes, right, took out a belt and threatened to beat a black guy with it. Joe Frazier stepped in and said, don't you dare do that to me. You know what happened next? He had to leave town. He had to pack up his bags, leave his family, leave his home forever, and get out of town. Because he didn't know what was going to happen next, because usually what happened next was horrible, horrible violence for the crime of asking to not be beaten with a belt. This is way past slavery. And in the Joe Frazier story, it's in the Jim Crow era. Now, earlier here, you see that after slavery, during Jim Crow, during a broader stretch of time, it is nothing but terror for African Americans in the South. Now, it was terrible things going on in the North as well, but this concentrates on the 12 Southern states. Here's another story. In 1910, a group of men rushed into a courthouse. They threw a rope around the neck of a black man accused of sexually assaulting a 3-year-old white girl. Through the other end of the rope, out a window, a mob outside yanked the man, Alan Brooks, to the ground and strung him up at a ceremonial arch a few blocks down Main Street. Can you imagine if you're that guy? The great majority of these cases, they didn't do it, right? They throw the noose around your neck and they start pulling it from the street. The terror must have been indescribable. Third case. Farther south still is the community of Streetman, where 25-year-old George Gay was hanged from a tree and shot hundreds of times in 1922. Not enough to kill the guy, stabbed, beaten, castrated, burned, hung, shot hundreds of times. It's a lesson. Know your role, know your place, never raise your head. One more story for you guys, and obviously there are thousands of these stories. I just want to give you a sense of what actually happened in this country. Thousands of people came in 1893 to see Henry Smith, a black teenager accused of murder, carried around town on a float, then tortured and burned to death on a scaffold. Now, in that same Civil Rights Museum in Alabama, I saw that sometimes they would have a picnic around the body. They would do all the things described here, hang, burn, castrate, and then, as one of the stories here explained, they'd have a soda pop around the guy. Sometimes they'd bring their families, literally, and they'd set out picnic grounds. And and as a memento, they would take home a piece of the body.